Ladies and gentlemen, the 2025 NHL playoffs are here. We now know every single matchup in the first round, and today, I'm going to be predicting every single one of them to see who ultimately wins the Stanley Cup this season. We're going to be going through every team, every matchup, dissecting every single bit, so make sure you watch till the end for every single matchup predicted, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this as we lead up to the playoffs and all throughout the year, presented by BetUS. Now, this year's playoff race was actually pretty interesting. Yes, there were a couple of races that have come down to the wire, like the wildcard races, but a lot of the divisional spots, a lot of the matchups, we've known for a while. I mean, Carolina versus New Jersey, for an example, feels like we've known that for basically a month now. And now that we know all the matchups, including which teams have the home ice advantage, I want to go through today's playoff predictions. Now, we're going to start out in the Western Conference, and I want to start out with this one because it has some really intriguing matchups, and a lot of history, too, between teams like Winnipeg, St. Louis, Dallas, Colorado, and, of course, LA, Edmonton for the fourth straight year. Jeez, man. But our first matchup in the West, of course, is between the President's Trophy winning Winnipeg Jets and the second wildcard team in the St. Louis Blues, and this is going to be an intense matchup. We have only seen this one time before, being in the first round back in 2019, and that was a pretty brutal loss by Winnipeg, and the Blues end up taking the advantage. This is the thing, though, that is so hard with this matchup, because the Winnipeg Jets are such a well-oiled machine, a deserved President's Trophy win. They were so consistent all throughout this year, having so few holes, and when they did have any holes, Connor Hellebuyck was there to fill them up. The problem, though, is that this Winnipeg Jets team has struggled to get out of round one, especially Connor Hellebuyck. It's been well documented his inconsistencies and struggles, especially to start out series in those first rounds. This, to me, is a real prove-it type of series for Winnipeg. They've had the regular season success. They've been so consistently good. Now it's the time to actually back that up with playoff results. But the Blues are an equally strong team, especially in this second half, being one of the best teams in the NHL, rising from a middling roster to a team that has really found itself and really found its chemistry. Jim Montgomery, of course, being a huge addition onto this team as a coach. He has been such a revolutionary force and exactly what the Blues have needed. Really, everything has fallen into place. Their defenses look so much more competent. The depth has been strong. You've got young players as well coming in, like Jimmy Snuggerud, players like Zach Bolduc as a rookie this year. Of course, Dylan Holloway's breakout season. A lot to like there. The big X factor, of course, is Connor Hellebuyck as well, who's been so good in the NHL, whether it be in the regular season or the Four Nations. He's been dominant throughout. But there is always upsets, there is always big surprises in the playoffs, and to me, I think St. Louis just has so much magic, so much chemistry, and I like a lot of the young players coming out of the team. They've already factored in so well, and even have a player like Jimmy Snuggerud, who's already fit really well into this Blues offense, especially on the power play. They just have so many different things going for them, so many things that have been locked into place, and you also have the improvements in players like Jordan Binnington, the improvements on that defense, and I think St. Louis is an extremely underrated team. I think they're going to end up getting it done and winning this series in 7 games, though it's going to be extremely close. I don't think you should doubt the Jets whatsoever. This is going to be an absolute bloodbath. Speaking of bloodbaths, let's get into an absolute hate-filled series coming up between the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche. Now, this one is just going to have so many different storylines. Not even just the Mikko Rantanen saga, but of course you have all the players coming back, and potentially Miro Heiskanen, potentially Gabriel Landeskog. My goodness, there's going to be so much to keep your eye on here. Now, of course, you guys know I'm a Dallas Stars fan, but I've been pretty spooked by this Stars team over the past few weeks. They're just a team that has not looked coherent whatsoever, kind of jumbled, and of course, the injuries that they've had have really mounted and really kept them from gaining any chemistry. The same thing you could say as well to the Colorado Avalanche, who have also just continued to deal with injury after injury, year after year. But they're a team that I think is looking pretty healthy going into this year's playoffs. And especially if you have a player like Gabriel Landeskog, just having him on the roster and back playing in any capacity is a boost for this team in many ways. But as I've talked about for Colorado, they're a team that has improved in so many pivotal directions. The goaltending I thought was a huge weakness with Georgiev. They go out and get Mackenzie Blackwood, who I thought was one of the most underrated starters out there. He's been terrific for them. I thought the center depth was a major issue. They go out and get Brock Nelson, Charlie Coyle, two guys who have major playoff experience that will be able to fit inside that middle six. I just think for Colorado, they fixed so many of their issues, and even outside of that, the depth has been improved. You got players like Ryan Lindgren coming in the defense that can add some more physicality. I just think for this Colorado team, they are really more complete than they've been since maybe 2022 when they won the Stanley Cup. And to me, I look at that Dallas defense, especially which continues to get broken down every single game, and even though Heiskanen might come back for the series, it doesn't seem like think it's going to be fully healthy for game 1 at least, and I think that is a major advantage for Colorado to come in and take this series. In my personal opinion, I think the Avs are going to get it done in 6. It's not going to be because of Mikko Rantanen not playing well. I think he'll be just fine, but the other issues for the Stars, namely on that defense, coming back to bite them again. Now we go into the last 2 series here, starting with Vegas versus Minnesota. And this is kind of one that I've gone back and forth on because, as we talked about with Dallas, Colorado, they're a team that's had some players like it coming back for the playoffs. In Minnesota's case, they've been injured all year. They've had so many different players at so many different points, and a team that has just not been able to find that consistent, healthy lineup. You, of course, have the major injury to Kaprizov, and he is finally back and better than ever, which is great to see. That is such a huge thing, I think, for Minnesota. It'll be interesting to see if they can catch fire right at the right time with all these new pieces being brought back on the roster, but I do think for Vegas and just how competent, how consistent of a team they've been, they do have the advantage here. In terms of who I think wins, I think personally it's going to end up going to the Vegas Golden Knights. I think they're going to end up winning in 5, though I do think for Minnesota, they're going to keep all of these 5 games extremely close, but unfortunately lose most of them in the end. I just think for Vegas, just the chemistry that they built all throughout the year, the consistency they've had in the lineup will just be a much bigger advantage that Minnesota doesn't quite have. Now on to the last matchup between the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers, and honestly, this might be the one I'm the most interested to see go down in the Western Conference, because if you would have said obviously a year ago or even 6 months ago, I think most people would probably say the Edmonton Oilers would have the advantage in this series, but the LA Kings have been different this year, man. Something feels just better with this team. They're less just 100% defensive. They got some more intensity, some more electrifying offense, and especially that home ice advantage is so important for LA. They're one of the best teams at home this year. They've had such a consistent record this season in LA, and I think that is a major factor in this series. LA, I think, has also been stronger in the games that they've played versus Edmonton this year. They've had more momentum. Edmonton is banged up. They're not going to have Matthias Ekholm for the first round, which I think is a massive blow to that defense that isn't getting talked about enough. I already think this Oilers team just had so many holes that they would have to overcome, even if they were completely healthy. I still think the depth is a massive issue. The goaltending has been a problem yet again for this team, and the defense always seems to come up as a disappointment. Last year, it was starting to come together at the right time, but I just think this year of how many injuries they've had, the lack of consistency, and the problems already there, I think the LA Kings are going to actually be able to win this series and win it in 6 games. I don't know why the font's so tiny, but you get the deal. Especially after 3 straight defeats, it might be foolish to actually see the Kings getting it done, but so many factors are coming together for them. Plus, I think they just have so much more depth, they're so much more exciting, and the goaltending position in Darcy Kuemper has been brilliant this season, and I think it's a main reason why the Oilers' offense might come up dry. Now, starting us out in the Eastern Conference, this is really the first matchup that I wanted to focus on because we have the Washington Capitals versus the Montreal Canadiens. A really interesting one here as the Habs just barely are able to squeak into the playoffs. Personally, for what they've shown recently, I'm not sure how much confidence I have in the Habs actually getting it done. The Washington Capitals, just like the Jets have been a well-oiled machine with the amount of youth they've had coming out of this roster and just truly making it so much better. You have the goaltending position of Logan Thompson, who has really shored that position up. The defense and the additions they made and Chikrin and Roy have been so good for that team, on top of the improvements in players like Varavarvi, who continue to get better and better, and then the offense. I mean, what can you say? Obviously, Alex Ovechkin has been unbelievable, but outside of that, you have so many great stories, players like Protas, players like Strome, Connor McMichael, who have been so dynamic and so good all throughout this year. I think for Washington, they just have so much going for them, and even though I don't know if they're gonna be an actual Stanley Cup winner this year, they have by far the best chance to do it since they won the Stanley Cup in 2018. A lot to look forward to, and I think for Washington, they're not done. This isn't the only year they'll be contending. They've really set themselves up for the future, just like, of course, a newcomer Montreal has. I do think in this series, though, just the differences in terms of defense, especially, I mean, I love my Lane Hudson's, of course, on Montreal, but the rest of that defense is concerning, let's just say, and I think Washington is going to pick it apart, especially as the series goes on. I think for Montreal, the lack of playoff experience is going to take hold here. Of course, you do have the players that were on that 2021 team, but I just think for the Habs, it's going to become a little bit of a problem with a lot of the younger players on that roster. So I think for Montreal, it'll be a good effort, but I think Washington is going to end up winning this in 5 games. Still, though, for Montreal to get this type of experience is huge. Now let's move on to the rest of the second round in the Eastern Conference, and let's go on to the Carolina Hurricanes versus the New Jersey Devils, a matchup that we've known for a while now, and I've had a lot of time to prepare for. The big thing I think that is a difference maybe from like a month ago is the Devils getting a little more health back. We've heard maybe potentially Dougie Hamilton, Jonas Siegenthaler potentially coming back, which is huge for the Devils. I don't think it's going to save their season because I still think Jack Hughes being out is just going to be a problem when it comes to the pure skill, even though he hasn't been a 100% dominant playoff player in the past. Even though the Devils team still has a lot of great pieces, of course, Nico Hischier can be a great first-line center if he needs to be. He has been that for the Devils this year especially. I still think for the New Jersey Devils, they have a little bit too many holes. The defense is kind of all over the place this season. The goaltending has been fine, but not up to the level you really want it to be. But you have a team in Carolina who's also looking pretty human. For the Canes, I still think they have a little bit of a top-end scoring problem, but the youth has been pretty good this year, and players like Jackson Blake, and of course, new addition in Logan Stankoven. I think the defense has been solid for them, and the goaltending, it's been good enough. I think these teams are honestly pretty similar in terms of what they need for going forward, what they could really use going forward, but I think for Carolina, they're going to end up using that advantage to the end, especially in the home ice. It's just like LA, as we talked about in the Western Conference race. Carolina has had one of the best home records in the league, and I think for a team like New Jersey, even though they had a strong season, as much as they could with the injuries they've had, I think Carolina eventually is going to get the advantage and win in 6 games. Let's move on to the Battle of Ontario, though, folks. Toronto versus Ottawa, and this is one, of course, we are all looking forward to, especially in the 2000s. Those battles were so much fun to watch. I think in this case, it's going to be a rejuvenation of that rivalry, because especially with Ottawa coming in hot here, finally making the playoffs for the first time in this rebuild, they want to prove themselves. I know if you're going to doubt Brady Tkachuk and the impact he's going to make, I'm really going to feel sorry for you, because he is poised to have a brilliant first round. And even though Toronto's had a solid season, especially being hot as of late, I think this is going to be a close series. The Ottawa Senators have been so pesky this year, especially in those close games, finding ways to win. That has been really the case all throughout this year for the Senators team, and the big difference compared to prior seasons. The defense hasn't been improved. Linus Ullmark, of course, as a huge goaltending addition for them, has been a major boost compared to prior seasons for the Sens. So they just have so much better of a built team. They feel so much more complete, and I think especially for the playoffs, they'll end to a couple wins here. But I do think in the end, the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win this series, though I think it will be close. I think it's going to go the distance, go 7 games. I think the big difference, though, could honestly be the goaltending. Anthony Stolarz has been incredible for the Leafs over the last little bit. I think over his last 5 games or something, he has like 3 shutouts, something like that. He's been absolutely incredible. And I think for the Leafs also, the difference in the defense, the difference in the way they play. I think for Toronto, it might be crazy to actually think about, but they have a lot more experience than Ottawa in this year's playoffs, and I think that could factor in. But now we go into the last matchup here between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers, and it's crazy to actually think that a Battle of Florida is going to be not the most hyped series coming into this year's playoffs, but that just really shows the quality of the matchups we have in store here for this first round. It's still going to be an amazing series, and as some of the other series as well that we've seen in the past between these two teams, yes, it will be a bloodbath with, of course, Brad Marchand being added to it, of course. But as you guys have probably seen, especially after the trade deadline, I've been a big fan of what this Tampa Bay Lightning team has been building. I was a little bit of a doubter coming into the season, but they have won me over again completely. I think one of the biggest reasons for that has been the improvements in the depth, and especially how much they've been able to factor in. Yes, of course, you have players like Nikita Kucherov who are playing at their absolute best right now, but I think players like Nick Paul, players like Mitchell Chaffee who have been able to come in and score a few goals here and there. The defense has had its ups and downs, but Ryan McDonagh being added on the team has been such a boost for that team defensively, and Andrei Vasilevsky is having one of his best seasons ever. Again, even though I don't think he had the greatest season last year, he's been back up to an elite level this season, and I think he's out to prove something. He's out to prove that he still can be the best goaltender out there, and I think in this first round, he's going to want to prove that pretty handily. But of course, you can never doubt this Florida team. Even though they've been banged up a little bit, they're still a team that always rises to the occasion in the playoffs, and they're adding players like Brad Marchand onto it, which is just unfair, man. I think the big difference in this series, though, and a reason why I think Tampa will come out on top, obviously home ice advantage is a pretty big thing for them, but I think the top end players in every single position for Tampa will end up overwhelming the Panthers. Of course, Nikita Kucherov playing at the level he is at, I think he is out to have an astounding playoffs this year. Victor Hedman has gotten back to a great level as well this year, and I think the goaltending difference might be the biggest one. Sergei Bobrovsky is still a solid goaltender and a solid starter, and of course was great for the Panthers in that Stanley Cup run, but I think in terms of the comparisons, I think in terms of Vasilevsky and what he could do, I think he's going to have an outstanding playoffs. I think there's going to be a massive difference there, and that will play a part. Though I don't think this series will go any less than 7 games. I see the Tampa Bay Lightning just getting it done in that 7th game and just moving on to the second round. Now, getting us started with the second round, we're going on to the Western Conference yet again, and we're going to start out here with the Colorado Avalanche versus the St. Louis Blues. One heck of a matchup here, and a great rivalry reinstated here in the 2025 playoffs. This is going to be a crazy one. I mean, I'm really sad that Kadri isn't on the Avs still, because him and Binnington, I would love to see it going for it in another playoff series, but I think this one is also going to be one that goes back and forth. St. Louis, of course, as we talked about, the amount of heat that they've had going into the playoffs, the chemistry they've had, I think could cause the Avs some pretty big problems. But I do think for Colorado, the big thing again is the health for them, really getting rejuvenated for this year's playoffs. I think the depth has been a major thing that has improved over the course of the year. I think the goaltending as well, even though Mackenzie Blackwood is probably going to be a little bit new to the whole big contender playoffs thing, I think he could have a massive advantage over Jordan Binnington if they play like they have this regular season. I also think in terms of the Avs, the top end forwards there, the top end players are going to be a major difference. Of course, you have a player like Robert Thomas who's been exceptional this year, but compared to Nathan McKinnon, it's not really much of a competition. But I also think for the Avs that trade down additions, the players like Coyle especially, who have been there, done that, have had so much playoff experience, those guys I think are going to make a pretty massive difference. So I think St. Louis will keep this close and keep it to 7 games, but I think the Colorado Avalanche end up winning in 7 to get to the Western Conference Final. Now, to see who will join them, let's go on to the other matchup here between Vegas and the LA Kings. And this is another one that I'd be really interested to see where it goes, because Vegas, of course, has had all the regular season success. They've had all the playoff success over the past few years, especially compared to a team like LA, who hasn't been able to really take that next step. But again, I think a big thing throughout this year's playoffs and a big theme will be the goaltending and how much that factors in. Because I look at Vegas, and even though the goaltending is solid, Aiden Hill has had a couple of solid seasons for them, I look at what Darcy Kemper is doing, and he is playing some of the best hockey of his life. He's been one of the best goaltenders in the NHL this year, one of the most consistent, and honestly is coming in as one of the best goaltenders heading into this year's playoffs. But I think for LA, they're going to really be out to prove something different, that they can be up to a different expectation than they have been before. I think for Vegas, even though they're going to put up a fight, I think for LA, they just have a lot going into this playoffs that I like a lot. I think players like Quinton Byfield are going to show up in so many critical areas. But even the fact that LA has been so good and so consistent with how to play like Drew Doughty as well in the defense, I think shows how competent they are. And when they are fully healthy, they got a lot of depth, I think, this year too. The additions of players like Warren Fogle especially have really changed the outlook of that Kings offense, and it made it a lot better for it. And hey, I haven't even mentioned him so far, but Andrei Kuzmenko has been a great addition for this Kings team since the deadline. I think he could factor in a lot to the power play and especially that offense. Now let's head on to the Eastern Conference in the second round and go on to Washington versus Carolina. And this is one that is honestly a coin toss for me. In Carolina's respects, they've still had a competent team and a lot going for them. But I feel like for Washington, the big difference is going to come down to the offense and the pace at which they play with. I think for the Caps, they just have so much youth. They have so much excitement there. And they're a team that I think could go really far because of it. But I also see the goaltending as a major difference. Logan Thompson compared to Kochachov, I think is going to be a pretty big issue for the Canes. I think Thompson's going to lock it down as this series goes on and really keep things tight. But I think these are two really well-structured teams, a lot of intensity, a lot of physicality, and that's exactly what I love to see. When I look at this series and who I ultimately see winning, though, I'm going to put the Washington Capitals in 5. The Canes, I think, will still put up a good fight in all 5 of these games, but a big X factor to me will be Logan Thompson and how well he plays in this series and throughout this whole playoffs. I think it's going to be a big reason why the label of frauds against Washington will end up being really taken off, because I think Thompson especially is going to be an absolute factor in every single game. And then we go on to another matchup that we've seen recently between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Oh man, I mean, this series is going to be electric, no pun intended actually, but there's just so much to like here. The rivalry that they've been really building up over the past couple of years, the intensity in this series, the goaltending battle even too. Stolar has been really great this year, and against Vasilevsky, I think can put up a bit of a fight. But I think for Toronto, even though home ice advantage will be pretty huge in this series, I still see a bit of a difference in terms of the playoff intensity that both of these teams will bring. And when it comes down to it, I think Andrei Vasilevsky is just going to dominate his way through. Though I do see a bit of an issue. Of course, we did see in the last Toronto-Tampa Bay series, Vasilevsky getting exposed a little bit. So maybe that is able to carry over. If it does, then I think Toronto has a massive advantage. But I think for Tampa Bay, especially when it comes to the top-end forwards, players like Kucherov, players like Point, the top-end players for Tampa Bay always seem to come through a little bit more than Toronto's top-end players, especially once it gets past the first round. So for those reasons, moving on to the Eastern Conference Final, I'm going to have the Tampa Bay Lightning winning in 5. I think it's going to be a pretty big series win for them, and especially players like Kucherov, I think are going to be absolute difference makers in every single game here. Now we move on to the conference finals, and this one is a little bit wacky, I will say that, but the playoffs always seem to have some wacky teams potentially getting into the second round, the conference finals, so that's what I'm going to predict here today. And of course, you got LA versus Colorado, you got Washington versus Tampa Bay, which I think is a little bit more of a likely situation for everybody predicting the Eastern Conference, but still, some really interesting matchups here, especially LA, Colorado, two teams that, if you would have said before the year, that would have been an interesting prediction for sure. Getting into it, let's start out, of course, with the Kings versus the Avs. I would be fascinated, especially from the Kings' perspective, to see how this series goes. You have the top-end players on Colorado, the McKinnons, the Natchuses, the Cale Makars, that I think LA has dealt with, of course, in the past. With Edmonton, and in the first round, they, of course, had to deal with them and those big-end stars. And you also have in the second round players like Jack Eichel that they had to deal with. So LA would have experience in that case and potentially winning against those players. But I do think in this situation, even though LA does have that home ice advantage and that has proven to be critical so far, I do think the Avs are going to be a team that is going to be hard to beat in this case. I think for the Kings, even though I think they have a solid defense and solid structure, the Avs are the exact type of team to be able to weaponize that and be able to attack you with speed and skill and that relentless type of effort. I think for the Kings, that's the type of team that they have in the past had struggles against. I think for the Avs, when they are at their best, they're a little bit more of a pure speed and skill team that I think for LA is even different than what they dealt with Edmonton, where I think the depth can be an actual benefit to Colorado. But I look at that defense and just how much they're able to move the puck. I look at how much that power play could be a factor as well. And I think for LA, it'll be a difficult series. I think in the end, it's going to be the Colorado Avalanche winning in 7. I do think the Kings still have a strong chance to win this one. Home ice advantage is critical for them. But I think for the Avs, something about this year for me just gives me a lot of hope for them, especially the players they have coming back from injury, players like Gabriel Landeskog. You can't really replace that type of locker room effect, having a player like that in the locker room, playing on the ice every single game. That, to me, I think will really energize Colorado in a way they haven't been since 2022. But now we find out who will meet the Colorado Avalanche in the Stanley Cup final. We have the Washington Capitals versus the Tampa Bay Lightning, a rivalry that we have seen so many different times in the playoffs over the last decade and a half, and I would love to see again in the Eastern Conference Final. This was a one as well that I could see going back and forth. The Capitals have proven themselves in a major way this season, especially if they are get to the conference final. But I look at Tampa Bay, and again, that difference in terms of the top end players, when you look especially in the forward group, when you look especially in the goaltending department, even though Logan Thompson has proven himself in so many different ways, this is also the first time that he's really being relied upon to be that full-time starter on a full playoff run. Of course, getting his job taken away from Adin Hill in the past by Vegas, that is something to take into effect. Vasilevsky has been there, he has done that, and he's been there in similar positions with Tampa Bay in the Eastern Conference Final as well. I think that experience will take the Bolts a long way too. Compared to Washington that has a lot of younger pieces, they're a team that is going to be playing with house money at this point. But even though I think they'll have a strong run and will really take it to the Bolts in the end, I think Tampa Bay is going to end up winning in 6 games and setting up a rematch of the 2022 Stanley Cup Final between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Colorado Avalanche. And I gotta tell y'all, this is one that I went back and forth on. I think this would be an incredible series, and honestly, I think would be a lot closer than what we saw in 2022. Sure, it was still a close series, but I think Colorado always kind of had the advantage in that one, at least when it came to those top-end moments and when they needed to win. Colorado seemed to always get the job done. But I think in this series, it's gonna be a lot closer, and in all honesty, I think there's really no chance it doesn't go 7 games. With how close these two teams are, really every single position, I think these are two teams that would just have so much hatred for each other, and that's exactly what we love to see. Of course, Tampa especially still has a lot of the same core pieces as they had in 2022, and I think would really enjoy some revenge against an Avs team that really took it to them. But I look at this series, and I look at what could potentially happen. I think for Tampa Bay especially, they have a lot of strong advantages there, especially in the goaltending department, even though I love Mackenzie Blackwood. Vasilevsky, if he is get to this point, is still a strong player to have. But I look at Colorado, and again, the magic that they could end up having this year with the return of Gabriel Landeskog, the depth that has been improved there, and also just how much they built upon their identity, getting players like Martin Necas who are just so much speed, so much skill all the time, and how much that'll bring to the top end of that lineup. I'm a little bit concerned about the defensive depth a little bit. Ryan Lindgren hasn't posted the greatest numbers for the Avs yet, but I still think in the playoffs when the going gets tough, he's going to be exactly the type of bottom pair defenseman you want. And I think for this Colorado Avalanche team, they just have so much fun. They have so many interesting parts going for them. But I do think in the end, the improvements in the depth for Tampa Bay especially actually a team that desperately needed them. The top end on the defense with players like Hedman and Ryan McDonough, as well as the goaltending difference. Vasilevsky, I think, is going to be an absolute X factor here, and I think we'll have a much better playoff series than they did versus the Avs last time around. I think this will definitely go 7 games, but in the end, I think the Tampa Bay Lightning are going to come out on top and be your Stanley Cup champs for 2025. Though honestly, even as I'm recording this, I still think there is a really good chance that Colorado come out in that series, and I could easily see a situation where they are the Stanley Cup winners in this scenario, but this is what I'm predicting as of today. Still a lot of different ways that this could go, of course, as the playoffs always have surprises in store, but as of right now, this is how I see it. Now, before you guys go, today's video is sponsored by BetUS TV, the place to make all your hockey picks all throughout the year, and especially with the playoffs, of course, right here, you can make picks on daily NHL playoff games, as well as the Stanley Cup winner. So if you're feeling somebody specific, BetUS TV is the place to make your pick. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and I want to know your thoughts down below on my predictions for this year's playoffs. What did you agree? What did you disagree with? And who do you ultimately see winning the Stanley Cup this season? Drop your predictions down in the comments down below. Of course, make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all of my hockey predictions talk right in one playlist. A big thank you to everyone who watched today, and hopefully it was a big thank you to everyone who watched today, and of course we'll be having a lot of content all throughout the playoffs, so hopefully you don't miss it there. Hopefully you have a fantastic hockey day, y'all, and a great playoffs. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.